The second pink line appeared slowly, faint but undeniable. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my breath hitching. Pregnant. The word echoed in my skull, equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Daniel and I hadn't planned this. We'd only been together 8 months. Still in that dizzying phase where everything felt electric, where his laughter made my stomach flip, where his hands on my skin felt like promises. But a baby? That was supposed to come later. I pressed a hand to my stomach, still flat, no sign of the life growing inside me. Oh God. I needed to tell him. I rehearsed the words all day. Daniel, we need to talk. Too ominous. So, funny story. Too casual. I'm pregnant. Too blunt. By the time he texted that he was on his way over, my nerves were frayed. I paced the living room, chewing my thumbnail raw. The door opened and there he was, tousled dark hair, that crooked smile that made my knees weak, his leather jacket smelling faintly of rain. Hey beautiful, he murmured, pulling me in for a kiss. I melted against him just for a second before pulling back. We need to talk. His smile faltered. Okay. I took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Silence. Then his hands dropped from my waist. Daniel didn't yell. Didn't curse. He just shut down. His face went blank, his eyes turning cold in a way I'd never seen before. You're sure? He asked, voice flat. I nodded. I took 3 tests. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Fuck Mia. My stomach twisted. I know it's not what we planned, but... Planned. He let out a bitter laugh. This wasn't even on the table. The way he said it, like I'd sprung some kind of trap, made my chest tighten. It was an accident, Daniel. But it's happening. He turned away, shoulders rigid. Yeah. For you. The words hit like a slap. The argument that followed was ugly. Daniel accused me of skipping birth control. I hadn't. I accused him of being selfish. He was. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. True. I said that didn't matter now. Also true. Then came the words that broke me. You know what? Fine. You want this baby? You have it. He grabbed his jacket. But don't expect me to stick around for a life I didn't sign up for. My breath caught. You're leaving. His hand paused on the doorknob. Yeah, Mia. I am. And just like that, he walked out. I didn't move for hours. The apartment felt too quiet, too big. I slid down the wall, hugging my knees to my chest, tears burning my cheeks. He left. He actually left. I'd known Daniel could be impulsive, but this was cruelty. My phone buzzed. A text from Layla. You okay? You've been radio silent all day. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. How did I even begin to explain this? Can you come over? I typed. I need you. Then I curled up on the couch and waited, one hand pressed to my stomach as if I could already protect the tiny life inside me from the pain of abandonment. Layla took one look at me and pulled me into a crushing hug. I shattered. Sobs racked my body, ugly and gasping as she held me. When I finally choked out the words, I'm pregnant, and Daniel left, her grip tightened. That motherfucker, she hissed. She didn't offer empty platitudes. Didn't tell me it would be okay. She just let me cry, stroking my hair like my mom used to when I was little. When I finally pulled away, hollowed out, she cupped my face. What do you want, Mia? I swallowed hard. I don't know. That was the truth. I was terrified of being a single mom, of raising a child alone, of Daniel's absence haunting us forever. But beneath the fear, a flicker of defiance. The next morning I woke up with puffy eyes and a resolve I didn't recognize. I made coffee, took a shower, sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen. Options. 1. Keep the baby. 2. Adoption. 3. Termination. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then slowly I circled the first one. Not because I was brave. Not because I was sure. But because the thought of not keeping this baby felt like losing something I hadn't even met yet. Daniel called a week later. I almost didn't answer. But some stupid hopeful part of me thought maybe he'd changed his mind. Hey, he said, voice cautious. We should talk. My pulse jumped. Okay. I've been thinking, he started, then hesitated. I can't do this, Mia. The hope curdled in my chest. Do what? Any of it. The baby. The responsibility. His voice hardened. I'm not ready to be a father and I'm not going to pretend I am. I clenched my fist. So that's it? You're just walking away. Yeah, he said like it was that simple. I am. The line went dead. And so did something inside me. That night I made a decision. If Daniel didn't want this baby, fine. I would love it enough for both of us. I would build a life, a good life without him. And I would never, ever let my child feel the way he'd made me feel. Abandoned. Wanted. Alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of doctor's appointments, frantic Google searches, and silent breakdowns in the baby aisle at Target. I told my parents. My dad hugged me tight, my mom cried. But they didn't judge. Just promised to help however they could. I started therapy. I sold my impractical little sports car and bought a sensible SUV. I read every pregnancy book I could find highlighting passages like my life depended on it. And slowly, day by day, the fear began to shift. Into determination. Into strength. Into something like hope. Then at 14 weeks I felt it, the tiniest flutter like a butterfly brushing my insides. Quickening. I froze, my hand pressed to my stomach. There was again. A whisper. A hello. I'm here. Tears welled in my eyes. Hi baby, I whispered. And for the first time since Daniel left, I smiled. The days after Daniel left blurred together in a haze of nausea and numbness. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. The pregnancy symptoms hit me harder than I expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion so deep it felt like my bones were made of lead. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. I kept replaying his words in my head. You trapped me. As if our baby was some calculated scheme rather than the beautiful accident it was. Layla became my lifeline. She showed up at my door every morning with ginger tea and saltine crackers, bullying me into eating at least a few bites before I inevitably ran to the bathroom. She held my hair back when I threw up, rubbed my back when I sobbed, and never once let me wallow in self-pity for too long. You're allowed to grieve the relationship, she told me one night as we sat on my couch, a pint of ice cream between us. But you don't get to drown in it. That baby deserves more than that. You deserve more. He was right. I knew she was right. But pulling myself out of the darkness felt impossible. Then at my 12-week ultrasound, everything changed. The moment the technician pressed the wand to my stomach and that grainy black and white image flickered onto the screen, my breath caught. There it was, a tiny bean-shaped being with a flickering heartbeat. My baby. The technician smiled. Strong heartbeat. Everything looks perfect. I stared at the screen, tears streaming down my face. That was the moment it became real. I wasn't just pregnant, I was going to be a mother. And no matter how scared I was, no matter how much Daniel had shattered me, I already loved this baby more than anything. That night I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, drowning in grief, barely functioning. If I was going to do this alone, I needed to fight. I started small. I cleared out the second bedroom in my apartment, envisioning it as a nursery. I researched single mothers support groups and signed up for prenatal yoga. And then, fueled by a mix of desperation and determination, I did something reckless. I quit my soul-sucking corporate job. Layla nearly had a heart attack when I told her. Are you insane? How are you going to support yourself? But I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. Over the years, I dabbled in making handmade baby blankets for friends' showers. People always raved about them. What if I turned that into a real business? The first few weeks were brutal. I spent my days hunched over my sewing machine, my growing belly making it harder to sit for long stretches. My fingers ached from threading needles and my bank account dwindled dangerously low. But then, miraculously, orders started trickling in. A friend shared my Etsy shop on her mommy blog. Then another. Suddenly, I was scrambling to keep up with demand. It wasn't glamorous. There were nights I cried from exhaustion. Mornings I woke up with my face pressed against the sewing machine. But for the first time in months I felt a flicker of pride. I was building something, for me, for my baby. Then at 28 weeks Daniel texted me. Hey, heard you're doing well. Can we talk? My blood ran cold. After months of silence, why now? I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand to know where he'd been all those nights I'd cried myself to sleep. Another part, the stupid, hopeful part, wondered if he'd changed his mind. Layla snatched my phone before I could respond. "Oh hell no," she said, thumb hovering over the delete button. "You don't get to waltz back in now that the hard part's over." He was right. I'd survived the worst of it without him. I didn't need his guilt or his half-hearted apologies. I blocked his number. That night as I lay in bed, my baby kicked hard, as if in agreement. I smiled, rubbing my stomach. "It's just you and me, kid," I whispered. "And we're going to be just fine." The third trimester hit me like a freight train. My back ached constantly, my feet swelled until even my loosest shoes felt like torture devices, and the baby, now unmistakably real with his relentless kicks and somersaults, seemed determined to rearrange my internal organs. But for the first time since Daniel left, I felt powerful in my body. Every stretch mark, every sleepless night spent shifting positions, even the heartburn that flared up after every meal. It all meant something. It meant I was growing life. My business, now officially named Little Stitches, had taken off beyond my wildest dreams. What started as a desperate attempt to avoid financial ruin had turned into a legitimate brand, with influencers tagging me in posts and boutique stores reaching out for wholesale orders. I hired my first employee, a sweet college student named Jess who handled packaging and customer service, freeing me up to focus on design and production. The extra help meant I could actually nap during the day, though my dreams were increasingly haunted by visions of labor and delivery. Then, at 34 weeks, the universe decided to test me. My landlord called to inform me he was selling the building, and the new owners planned to renovate, which meant terminating all leases. "You've got 60 days, he said apologetically. I hung up the phone and burst into tears. I couldn't move now, not when I was this pregnant, not when the nursery was finally set up. Layla found me sobbing in the rocking chair, surrounded by half-packed boxes I'd dragged out in a hormonal rage. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly, confiscating the packing tape from my shaking hands. That weekend, she and my parents descended on my apartment like a well-organized army. My dad measured walls and muttered about square footage while my mom scoured listings online. Layla handled the logistics, scheduling viewings and negotiating with movers. By some miracle, we found a quaint two-bedroom cottage on the outskirts of town with a sunlit room perfect for a nursery and, blessedly, a small detached studio I could convert into a workspace. The rent was higher, but so were my profits. The move was brutal. I waddled around directing traffic while everyone insisted I sit down before you pop. But the moment I saw the nursery set up in the new house, the pale yellow walls, the hand-stitched mobile swaying gently above the crib, I knew we'd landed exactly where we were meant to be. Then at 3:17 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, my water broke. There was no dramatic gush like in the movies. Just a slow leak that had me second-guessing until the first contraction hit like a sledgehammer. I barely had time to call Layla before another one doubled me over. By the time she screeched into my driveway, pajama-clad and wild-eyed, my contractions were 5 minutes apart. The hospital admittance process was a blur of paperwork and pain. When the nurse checked my dilation and announced I was only at 3 centimeters, I nearly sobbed. 12 hours later, after pacing the halls, squeezing Layla's hand hard enough to bruise, and finally caving to the epidural, the doctor looked up from between my stirruped legs and said the words that sent terror through me. "He's breech." Everything accelerated into a nightmare of rushed consent forms and beeping machines. The emergency C-section felt surreal, like watching myself from outside my body. The cold operating table, the blue drape blocking my view, the alarming pressure of hands working where I couldn't feel pain but could feel movement. Then a cry. A piercing, furious wail that cut through the antiseptic air. "They're just cleaning him up," the anesthesiologist murmured as I strained to see. Then a nurse appeared beside me, holding a squirming pink bundle. "Meet your son." His name hit me like a revelation as I took in his wrinkled forehead, his perfect bow lips, the shock of dark hair so like his father's. When they placed him on my chest, still damp and whimpering, the world narrowed to the weight of him, the smell of him. This was the moment I'd feared for months, the moment I'd worried I wouldn't be enough. But as his tiny fingers curled around mine, I understood with bone-deep certainty. I would move mountains for this child. Recovery was brutal. The C-section incision burned with every movement, breastfeeding was its own special hell, and the sleep deprivation made me hallucinate shadows in the corners of the nursery. But when Liam finally latched properly for the first time, when he fell asleep on my chest with his little sighs, when he stared up at me with those alert dark eyes, none of the pain mattered. Then 3 weeks postpartum my lawyer called. Daniel had filed for paternity testing. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. I watched Liam doze in his bassinet, his chest rising and falling, completely unaware that his life was about to be upended. I'd been so focused on surviving motherhood that I'd forgotten. Daniel might be gone, but he wasn't gone for good. Layla found me sitting on the nursery floor, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the legal notice through tears. She read it silently, then crushed it in her fist. "Over my dead body," she snarled. I wanted to share her fury, but all I felt was fear. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Liam. And I had no idea how to protect him from the man who'd already broken my heart. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and formal, their sterile language belying the devastation they carried. Petition to establish paternity. Request for parenting time. The words blurred as my hands shook, Liam's sleepy coos from his bouncer suddenly feeling fragile, something to be shielded from the ugliness unfolding. My lawyer, a razor-sharp woman named Diane who specialized in ripping negligent fathers to shreds in court, didn't sugarcoat it. "He's not just asking for visitation, Mia. He's demanding joint custody, after abandoning you during the pregnancy and ghosting you for months." Her voice turned icy. "We're going to bury him. But first there was the paternity test, a humiliating ordeal where a nurse swabbed Liam's tiny mouth as he wailed, his confusion shattering me. Daniel didn't even show up. His lawyer delivered the samples. When the results came back, 99.9999% match, as if there'd ever been doubt, Diane warned me what would come next. "He'll use your single motherhood against you. Your finances, your emotional state, even your business. They'll twist it all to paint you as unstable." That night, I lay awake, staring at Liam's monitor, paralyzed by the fear that some stranger in a robe could rip him from my arms because his father had suddenly decided to care. Daniel's legal strategy became clear at our first mediation session. His lawyer, a smarmy man in a too-tight suit, slid a document across the table outlining his client's generous offer: primary physical custody for Daniel, with me relegated to weekends. "Given Ms. Carter's unpredictable self-employment," the lawyer drawled, "my client is clearly the more stable parent." I nearly lunged across the table. Diane gripped my wrist, her nails biting into my skin as she coolly dismantled their argument. My tax returns showing six-figure profits, the nanny I'd hired, the glowing testimonies from my pediatrician and therapist. But when Daniel finally spoke, it wasn't to his lawyer. It was to me, his voice low and wounded. "You kept him from me, Mia. You didn't even tell me when he was born." The audacity stole my breath. The court-ordered parenting coordinator was worse. A condescending woman who took notes as Daniel spun tales of me alienating him, who frowned when I mentioned the nights I'd spent sobbing over his abandonment. "Have you considered how your resentment might harm Liam?" she asked, as if I were the villain here. I left each session shaking, crawling into Liam's nursery to watch him sleep, his tiny fists curled like he was ready to fight the world for me. Then the bombshell. Daniel's fiancée, a perfectly coiffed woman named Elise, began appearing at hearings, her diamond ring glinting as she cradled Liam a little too possessively during supervised visits. She was the weapon, proof of Daniel's stable two-parent home. Diane's private investigator uncovered the truth. Elise was a trust fund baby with connections to the judge. Suddenly, the rulings grew suspiciously favorable to Daniel. Extended visitations, demands for overnight stays despite Liam being exclusively breastfed. The breaking point came when the judge ordered Liam to spend Christmas Eve with Daniel's family. I sobbed in the courthouse bathroom, my milk letting down from stress, staining my blouse. That night, Layla found me hunched over Liam's crib, whispering desperate promises. "I won't let them take you." She pried him from my arms, her voice firm. "We fight dirty now." What followed was a legal guerrilla war. Diane subpoenaed Daniel's financials, exposing his mountain of gambling debts. We deposed Elise's ex, who testified about her volatile temper. And then the kill shot. A bartender came forward with security footage from the night I'd told Daniel I was pregnant, his drunken rant about trapping me crystal clear on the tape. The judge's demeanor shifted overnight. When the final ruling came, primary custody for me, Daniel granted only supervised visits pending therapy. I didn't celebrate. I just held Liam tighter, his heartbeat against mine, a reminder. This war wasn't over. Daniel's parting glare in the hallway said the same. But for now my son was safe in my arms. And I'd burn down the world before I let anyone threaten that again. The years after the custody battle passed in a blur of first steps and first words, of late-night fevers and sticky-fingered laughter that slowly healed the cracks in my heart. Liam grew into a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, his father's dark eyes but my stubborn chin, his giggles echoing through our little house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Daniel became a ghost haunting the edges of our lives. Court-mandated visits that he often cancelled, child support payments that arrived inconsistently, the occasional awkward encounter at the park where he'd stare at Liam like a stranger studying a puzzle he couldn't solve. I stopped flinching at his name, stopped dreaming about his betrayal. Or so I told myself. Then on Liam's 5th birthday, as I was hanging streamers in our backyard, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family court app. Daniel had petitioned for unsupervised overnights. My hands went numb, the balloon I was holding escaping into the sky as if fleeing the news. Diane's response was immediate. He's remarried. Judge will see this as stability. We need to prepare. That night, as Liam blew out his candles surrounded by friends, all I could see was the shadow of Daniel's looming threat, the way his new wife smiled too brightly in the Facebook photos Diane had printed for evidence. Liam's questions started soon after. Why does Daddy only see me at the boring office? He asked one evening, his small fingers tracing the superhero stickers the visitation supervisor had given him. My throat closed. I'd rehearsed this moment for years, the careful therapeutic-approved explanations about grown-up problems. But faced with his trusting gaze, the words turned to ash in my mouth. Your daddy and I began, then swallowed hard when Liam interrupted with the gut punch only a child could deliver. Is it because I was bad when I was born? The next morning, I marched into Diane's office with Liam's crayon drawing of our family. Just the two of us, the stick figure me twice as tall as him, our smiles taking up half the page. Fight this, I demanded, slapping it on her desk. However you have to. Diane's strategy was brutal in its precision. She subpoenaed Daniel's therapist records, uncovering his abandonment issues and explosive temper masked by charm. We hired a child psychologist who testified that disrupting Liam's routine could cause irreparable harm. And then, the miracle. Daniel dropped the petition without explanation, his lawyer muttering about prioritizing the child's well-being. The relief was short-lived. That summer, Liam started kindergarten, and with it came the innocent cruelty of other children. You don't have a dad? A classmate asked during pickup, her voice carrying across the playground. Liam's lower lip wobbled as he clutched my hand tighter. I do. His confusion shattered me. That night, I did the unthinkable. I texted Daniel. Liam needs you to show up. Just once. Be the dad he believes you are. The read receipt appeared instantly. No reply. Weeks passed. The leaves turned, Liam's birthday came and went, and I buried the hope that Daniel would ever change. Then on a frigid December morning my doorbell rang. Liam barreled past me before I could stop him, his shriek of, "Daddy," like a knife between my ribs. Daniel stood on my porch, snow dusting his shoulders, holding a clumsily wrapped present and looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. I got your message, he said quietly. Behind him, a moving van idled at the curb. Liam was already tugging him inside, babbling about his toy fire truck, but Daniel's eyes locked onto mine over our son's head. Not with apology, not with love, with something far more dangerous. Recognition. The silent understanding that this fragile piece wasn't for me or for him, but for the little boy who deserved more than our war. As Liam dragged Daniel toward his room to show him everything, I let the door swing shut behind them, the ghost of all we'd lost whispering through the cracks. The first month of Daniel's return was a minefield of forced civility and swallowed rage. He showed up every Sunday like clockwork, bearing overpriced toys that Liam adored and I secretly resented. Each one felt like a bribe, an attempt to buy the love he hadn't earned. But watching Liam light up when Daniel helped him build the elaborate train sets, seeing the way our son imitated his father's mannerisms after just a few visits, twisted something deep in my chest. The worst part. Daniel was good with him, patient where I was frazzled, adventurous where I was cautious, as if fatherhood had unlocked some hidden version of himself that even I hadn't known existed. Then came the nightmares. Liam, who had always slept like a rock, began waking up screaming about Daddy leaving again. The child psychologist called it reactive attachment. The terror of losing what he'd just regained. Daniel's face when I told him was unreadable, but that night I found him sitting on my porch in the dark, his voice raw. I didn't realize. He trailed off, staring at his hands. He remembers me leaving. The vulnerability in his tone caught me off guard. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd fallen for beneath the man who'd shattered me. Things shifted after that. Daniel started texting daily, not just about visits, but asking what Liam was reading, if he'd eaten vegetables, forwarding articles about kindergarten science fairs. He showed up early to help with homework, stayed late to do bath time, and slowly, begrudgingly, I stopped hovering like a prison warden during their visits. Until the afternoon I walked into the kitchen to find Daniel holding Liam's sobbing form, his little arm bleeding from a playground fall. "I've got you, buddy," Daniel murmured, pressing gauze to the wound with steady hands while Liam buried his face in his father's neck. The sight knocked the breath from my lungs. My baby seeking comfort from the person who'd once abandoned us both. The fragile peace shattered 2 weeks later when I found Liam crying in his closet. "Daddy says you won't let him live with us," he hiccuped, and the world tilted. Daniel had been whispering about custody changes to our 5-year-old. I stormed to his apartment ready to declare war, but the scene that greeted me stopped me cold. Daniel packing boxes, his new job transfer letter on the counter. "Portland," he said quietly. I never asked Liam about living together. He saw the boxes and assumed. The unspoken truth hung between us. He was leaving. Liam's devastation was a living thing. He stopped drawing family pictures, left Daniel's goodbye presents untouched. When I tried to explain, he screamed words that mirrored my deepest fears. "Daddies always leave." Daniel's video calls went unanswered until one evening, Liam whispered the question that had clearly been haunting him. Was it my fault? That's when I did something reckless. I booked a flight to Portland. The reunion at the airport was surreal. Liam launching himself into Daniel's arms. Daniel's shocked gaze over his head, mouthing thank you to me. Watching them together in Daniel's cramped apartment. Liam chattering excitedly about the adventure. Daniel hanging his crayon drawings on the fridge. I realized the terrible truth. My son needed his father. Even the flawed, inconsistent version Daniel was. And that meant I had to find a way to let him in. On the flight home, Liam slept against my shoulder, his cheeks still damp from goodbye tears. As the plane cut through the clouds, I made a silent vow. No more wars, no more ultimatums. Just a mother's fierce love, strong enough to share, resilient enough to survive even the deepest betrayals. Daniel would never be the partner I'd dreamed of, but maybe, just maybe, he could become the father Liam deserved. The first snow of winter was falling when Daniel showed up at my doorstep with Liam asleep in his arms and desperation in his eyes. "I need to talk to you," he whispered, his breath fogging in the cold air. I wanted to shut the door, to protect myself from the hope that flickered every time he looked at me like that. But the way Liam's small hand clutched his father's jacket made me step aside. Daniel laid him gently in bed, brushing snowflakes from his hair with a tenderness that contradicted every harsh word I'd ever spoken about him. When he turned to face me in the dim kitchen light, I braced for another battle. Instead, he handed me an envelope. Inside were plane tickets, not just for Liam but for me. "I want us to go to Vermont," he said quietly. "To that cabin you always talked about. The one with the sleigh rides and the hot chocolate." My fingers trembled against the paper. I'd mentioned that fantasy exactly once, years ago, in a sleep-deprived midnight confession when I was pregnant and terrified. He'd remembered. Why now? The question came out sharper than I intended. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd forgotten about before meeting my gaze. "Because I've spent 5 years trying to prove I'm not my father. But what if I'm trying to prove I could be yours?" The raw vulnerability in his voice unraveled something in me. That night, curled on opposite ends of the couch with mugs of tea gone cold, we talked in a way we never had before. Not as adversaries, not as co-parents, but as the people who'd loved each other first. He told me about the therapy he'd kept secret, the panic attacks that still came when he thought he was failing Liam. I confessed how lonely single motherhood had been, how I'd hated him most for making me strong instead of soft. When dawn painted the kitchen in pale gold, we were still talking, the years of hurt laid bare but no longer bleeding. The Vermont trip was a revelation. Watching Daniel patiently teach Liam to ice skate, falling more than the toddler but laughing louder. I saw the man I'd fallen for before the fear had hardened him. At night, after Liam was asleep between us in the big cabin bed, Daniel's fingers brushed mine in the dark. Not pushing. Just remembering. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he murmured on our last night, the firelight dancing across his face. "Just the chance to earn it." Back home the shift was gradual. Daniel started showing up for more than just his scheduled visits. Unexpectedly fixing my leaky faucet, bringing soup when Liam and I caught colds, sitting through parent-teacher conferences without complaint. Every act was a quiet rebellion against the man he'd been. Layla warned me not to trust it. "People don't change that much," she said over coffee one morning. But then Liam came running in with a crayon masterpiece, 3 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun, and I realized with a jolt that he'd drawn us all the same size for the first time. The turning point came in March, when Daniel found me sobbing in the hospital waiting room after Liam's appendectomy. He didn't offer empty platitudes, just sat beside me, his shoulder solid against mine until the doctor came out with good news. That night, as we kept vigil in Liam's recovery room, Daniel reached across the hospital bed to tuck a stray curl behind my ear. The gesture was so familiar, so achingly tender, that the last of my resistance crumbled. "I'm still scared," I admitted in the dark. His thumb brushed my knuckles. "Me too." We took it painfully slow. Dinner dates while Liam was at my parents'. Text messages that had nothing to do with parenting schedules. The first cautious kiss in my doorway after 6 months of this fragile dance. Chaste but charged with 5 years of unsaid things. Liam, perceptive as ever, took one look at our linked hands over breakfast the next morning and announced, "Daddy's staying forever now," with the absolute certainty only a child could muster. The wedding was small, just family in our backyard, Liam proudly carrying the rings. When Daniel slid the band onto my finger, his voice broke on the vows he'd written himself. "For every day I failed you, I promise a lifetime of making it right." Later, as we danced under string lights, Liam asleep in my arms, Daniel pressed his forehead to mine. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a second chance to be the man you saw before I could see him myself." The truth was he'd always been there, the real Daniel buried under layers of fear and self-doubt. It had taken fatherhood to excavate him, but here he stood, imperfect, striving hours. As the music swelled and Liam sighed contentedly against my shoulder, I realized this wasn't the ending I'd stopped daring to hope for. It was something better, a beginning built on hard-won trust, on scars that had healed stronger than unbroken skin. Daniel's lips brushed my temple, his arms encircling us both, and for the first time in years, I let myself lean into the embrace without reservation. We were a family, not despite our storms, but because we'd learned to weather them together. Think.